Revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine has been cooling for 10 years and counting. I, 40F, have been married to my husband, 44M, for 20 years now. We have 2 kids, 16F and 13M. My husband is what I would consider a high earner by middle-class standards. Also, strap in folks, this is going to be long. I've never told anyone, so. 10 years ago, and by complete coincidence, I found out that my husband has been cheating on me, with men, and that from before we got married. We live in a smallish town in the south of the USA, him coming out as gay will have consequences. I believe that that is the only reason he has not come out to anyone. First, here's how I found out he was cheating on me. He got sloppy, left a credit card bill, for a secret card, in the pocket of a coat. While going through it I found all the telltale signs of infidelity: payments to a hotel in a nearby county, restaurant bills, gifts, flowers, condoms and lubricant, etc. I started camping outside the hotel on days he told me he would be late, and I saw him bringing different men there. I am very good at compartmentalization and have a great poker face, comes with growing up in an abusive household, so I was able to give myself the time to cool off, and to come up with what I should do. First thing I did was getting an STD panel, since I didn't know how safe he was with his partners. It came out negative. Then I convinced him that we should use condoms, since I was having side effects from the pill. He was okay with it. I had a long think, and I came up to the decision that I was not going to confront him, nor was I going to leave him. He was able to provide me a really good lifestyle, one that I would never be able to afford with my high school diploma, a cleaning lady, a nanny to help with the kids, regular spa days and a country club, a new car every other year, luxury family vacations every year. He was a good dad, a good partner, the cheating aside, and really good in bed. But I was not going to let him have a single guilt-free week in his life. That would be my revenge. I started small, planning great date nights for us, telling him that I felt our relationship has cooled, that I wanted the spark back. Then I would sometimes slip into conversation some tea about a cheating husband, a gasped gay man that has been using his poor wife as a beard, complimenting the only gay couple we know for having the courage of being real men, who were out and proud of themselves. On the other hand, I would praise him as the perfect husband to anyone and everyone, especially if he was in earshot. The amount of guilt gifts I got was astounding. The man was even sending me flowers weekly. It continued the same way for years. I could literally see how much it was weighing on him. Me? Well, my parents were part of a commune with the concept of free love. I was the same. I just considered myself in an open marriage. It seems that cheating is easier to ignore if you are not that big on monogamy in the first place. And my husband was keeping me satisfied, so I felt no need to find a partner of my own. Then 4 years ago, I guess he met the love of his life. He started seeing just the one guy. I was seriously thinking of ending the whole thing, especially since I have started a business by then, and was able to bring in enough money to support myself and my kids, while maintaining my lifestyle. But then he went and introduced his side piece to us. He fucking brought him into our house, introduced him to our kids, and that was enough for me to keep tormenting him. Apparently he was a new friend he made while golfing. He started hinting at moving to another state, one where it would be easier for him to come out. I refused. I told him that my business was here, and I was not going to start over in another state. Also the kids had their friends and extended family here, it would be unfair to uproot them. Then he started trying to start arguments. I guess he wanted us to fight, then for me to ask for a divorce. I just stopped all those arguments in their tracks. I would just agree with whatever he said. He was right, I was wrong. And to make it up to him, how about a nice dinner and some great sex? He hated that. I knew from spying on his phone that having sex with me felt like cheating on his boyfriend. The audacity of this man. I also knew that his boyfriend was pressuring him to leave me almost every day. He was stuck between a rock and a hard place. He started drinking, and when it got too heavy, that was when I decided that enough was enough. I wanted to ruin his life, not his health. Also, I grew up with an alcoholic father, and did not want that for my kids. So I gathered all the evidence of his infidelity over the last 9 years, photos with different men, conversations, his Grindr profile, even though he no longer had one, everything. Then I hired a divorce attorney, and mailed the evidence to his employer. He has a morality clause in his contract, and adultery breaks it. All his relatives, including parents, as well as our church, I was never big on religion like him. It was like a bomb exploded. He was fired, the congregation turned on him, for cheating, not for being gay. Let's keep that straight. I would never allow me kids to be part of a church that discriminated against their father, even if he was not out. His parents wouldn't take him in after I kicked him out, and he was shamed publicly, Gotta love that small town gossip mill. And the cherry on the top? His boyfriend was run out of the town, and he couldn't follow him because he wanted to fight for custody of our kids. Now almost a year later, I am a free woman. I got to keep the house, my car and my business. He got 75% of the retirement and investments accounts, but he won't be paying alimony. I got full custody, he got visitations. I also got child support. He had to move 6 hours away to find a new job, couldn't put the last job he worked at his whole life as a reference, his relationship with his family is rocky, his reputation in town is ruined, so he can't move back anytime soon, the love of his life left him for good, and my kids only tolerate him because I did my best to shield them, and to tell them that he is still a good father to them. I also made sure to treat him politely, never talked bad about him, and had a lengthy talk about how their father being gay is okay, it's who he is and that it was not his fault. That the only wrong thing he did was hiding it from me. So I guess the results of his cheating was years of guilt followed by a ruined life. A fitting twist. I had a pretty terrible childhood. Don't get me wrong, I have heard of way worse, but it was far from healthy or normal. When I was young, my parents were millionaires, my father's parents owning several of the largest businesses in the region. They divorced before I was a teenager, and both of their lives plummeted downhill. By the time I was 16, I was living on my own. Drugs, alcohol, and addiction have long since killed them both. Neither of them ever worked a job since I was a teenager. Both of them died homeless before the age of 50. I joined the military and left town without ever looking back. As more years passed, I added more and more distance, physically and mentally, from my parents. When I was 20, I learned that my mother had been arrested for stealing a large sum of money from my grandmother, who was living on her own, but in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. The state ended up pressing charges against my mother because my grandmother would not. The detective told me that they had to because my mom and her POS boyfriend were fueling the criminal underground where she lived. I was lost and shocked. I knew my mother had problems, but until this moment, I had always viewed her as a sort of forest hippie. This is the moment that is the catalyst for my nuclear revenge. You see, my grandmother was pretty wealthy. Terrified that she would be locked away in an old folks' home, she entertained the leeching of my mother and POS guy. The problem is that it was never enough. Even after my grandmother bought my mother a house down the street from her, she continued to rob her own mother blind. She also fed my underage sister a stream of drugs and brought her in on the con. It ultimately resulted in my mother and sister getting their first felony conviction. Grand theft and check fraud, which my mother tried to pin on her own daughter, because she was just a minor. A few years later, I was newly married with my first child and freshly returned from my first deployment to Iraq. We just completed another move across the country, and I am starting a new job at a new unit. I get home from work and have a strange short voicemail from my uncle, who is like the okayest guy I have ever met. It literally just says, "My mom is in the psych ward at the big hospital in her town. She left everything in your name. I'm flying back home." This is where I learned that the legal document my grandma had me sign when I was 16 made me the executor of her estate, power of attorney, etc. My unit arranges a very generous amount of time off to fly across the country and deal with this bizarre scenario. She lived alone in this massive house. My mom had destroyed the house my grandmother bought her, then moved into grandma's house on the auspices of caring for her. There were so many fleas inside that contractors I hired to make repairs wouldn't go inside. Needles everywhere, and for some reason, everything was an ashtray. It was an insane thing to witness/experience. I still refused to interact with my mom at this point of my life, but now that I had the keys to the kingdom, aka access to the pot o' gold, she tried to worm back into my life with a renewed vigor. I always just told her to fuck off. My grandmother, in the meantime, had been deemed unfit to live on her own. I was 23, with a new baby and marriage, if you remember, so I made the poor decision to put my grandmother into a nursing home. I fixed up the house, rented it to create passive income so she would not deplete her savings, and headed back home. Of course, Grandma is spicy and got kicked out of her swanky retirement home when she broke a coffee cup over some other lady's head for snooping around in her room. She was apparently wearing my grandmother's shoes when she got clocked. The same woman, a resident, had propositioned me in front of my wife when we were touring the facility. She was a different kind of the same spicy as Grandma. Her only option after the incident was a psych ward. So my senile grandmother moved in with my family, and she lived with us for more than 5 years until her care was just out of our capability. This is about the time that I exacted my revenge. When the state filed charges against my mother, way back when I was 20, Part of her restitution included a lien that was placed against her property in the name of my grandmother for a little less than $100,000. Some years later, my mother had not paid her property taxes in so long that she was about to lose the house. She called me to explain that the lien would not be paid if the house was auctioned, which I knew was not true, but I saw an opportunity. I eventually worked out a deal with her. She would sign the deed over to me, and I would then sell the house and pay for her to move somewhere else. I fly to town, meet her, and sign the deed over. She expected me to use my name and credit to get her a luxury apartment. She also wanted me to buy her a new truck, and let's not forget the moving company. I rented her a U-Haul truck and got her a storage unit that I had paid for 6 months. Then I put her and Shithead up in an extended stay for a little while. I fixed up the property and sold it to the same rental group that bought my grandmother's house shortly before. I used the money to buy annuities that enable my grandmother to live in a normal house with a live-in nurse and care at 1:4 ratio. Which is amazing for her. She still might run out of money because of what my mother did, and I honestly don't know what will happen then. She's got some years before I have to worry, and she is just shy of 100. My mother was on the street within 6 months. The last time I saw her, she looked like the crazy person who lives under a bridge. She did at one point. She was covered in sores, balding, and methed out. She'd received a Social Security disability back payment of what would have been a significant amount for her. She died in a hospital less than 3 days later. Partied herself to death. The POS dropped her off at the curb and never saw her again. I told dude I would give him some money if he gave me the key to the storage unit. Somehow, years later, she had managed to keep it. I shared the loot with my siblings, gave POS $100 and closed that chapter of my life permanently. Karma generates interest over time. In the 3rd grade I was an awkward kid, had a mean drunk father, struggled to fit in and make friends, was bullied and shunned by other kids. One of my classmates, let's call him Derek, who regularly partook in bullying me, showed me kindness one day. Being deprived of kindness or attention so regularly I was putty in his hands. He hanged out with me during recess when I was usually alone, we laughed and talked about girls we like, he even apologized for being an asshole to me. The reason he was nice to me was because I had brought a very popular, expensive Batman action figure to school with me to pass the time since I was alone mostly. I saved allowance and mowed lawns for 2 months to buy that toy. Everyone wanted one. By the end of the day he asked me if he could lend the action figure, and like the naive, socially inept kid I was, I trusted him with it. The deal was to return it the following morning. I went home so happy, completely fooled, I never suspected a thing. The following day he completely ignored me. When I tried to talk to him he acted like I was crazy. When I asked him to return the action figure he simply said, "You never gave me any Batman, maybe you imagined it," and when I persisted he threatened to beat my ass. When I complained to my teacher I was told that it was my own fault for bringing toys to school. I was afraid they would involve my father, so I dropped it. I couldn't let my father know or I would be called a pussy and have my ass beat and punished for the next 2 weeks. What's worse is Derek told all the girls that I confided to him about fancying that I lusted after them and that I wanked to them. I was a social outcast before that, but at least I was tolerated. But after his smear campaign with the girls I was a leper, people wouldn't even look me in the eyes, not even the teachers. Kids started throwing stones at me, sabotaged and vandalized my property. It was hell. I did nothing about it but cry. I was just a weak-willed kid after all, but to this day I wish I'd bit someone's ear off or something, anything in retaliation. After a while the bullying died down, I focused on my studies and started getting good grades. Derek started talking to me again, but I ignored him completely. Sometimes he would repeat, "Why are you being such a baby? You didn't give me anything, you imagined it." By the end of the year we moved houses and I transferred to another school not far away. Things were much better there, I finally had friends and I was not as naive anymore, so I was not as easily targeted. But I was still mostly me and still got picked on now and then. Over the years I became somewhat of a delinquent, and in high school I got into regular fights. I may have been overcompensating for the lack of a spine I had in my younger years. I bartended in nightclubs, hotels, and cruise liners in my early 20s. This helped me a lot to be more socially adept and to understand social dynamics and human nature. I finished trade school and qualified as an electrician and later as a plumber. I know, water and electricity, but believe it or not, I thought it was ingenious at the time. I started my own business, developed a reputation for excellent workmanship in my local area and did well for myself. When I was 29, I'm 36 now, I received a call out at 2 in the morning for a flooding emergency at a local residence. When I got there the place was a mess, water was jetting out of a burst pipe and electrical equipment was shorted. It was highly dangerous. The living room floor was caved in due to a sinkhole. I was met by the wife, let's call her Jane, hysterical and beside herself. She somehow thought that she was responsible, which I found odd. I assured her that it couldn't possibly be her fault. He arrived not 5 minutes later. His demeanor was irate. He didn't greet or shake my hand when I offered. I recognized him immediately, Derek from all those years ago. He demanded to know why I have not begun fixing the issue yet. I was professional, told him what I'd told the wife in terms of costs, but I hid the written quote in my vehicle. I told him who I was and acted happy to see him, assured him that he was in good hands. After a while of arguing with his wife, he seemed to calm down and joked around with me. I knew I had fooled him. We talked about our careers, kids, our school days. I gave him tips and fake recommendations. We got along great. His trust was easy to gain. He must have thought of me as a complete sucker. I assured him that he was in good hands and this would be fixed in no time. I was careful not to start any actual work on the property. Doing the smallest thing would make me responsible for all of it. Derek left after an hour or so and his wife stayed behind. I started my revenge. When I was doing my assessment, I noticed that most of the building did not comply with city regulation and did not adhere to the registered and approved plans. There were multiple safety hazards and all plumbing and electrical work were completed by unqualified and uncertified people in an attempt to save money. Also, the pipe in question had been leaking for a few weeks at least, getting worse by the day and finally causing disaster, which means their water bill would be astronomical at the end of the month unless a qualified plumber endorses a rebate with the municipality. I called my contact at the city, let's call him Donovan, and notified him of all the regulatory violations, safety hazards and non-city compliant installations on the property. I also told him of the possible water bill. He promised to be there the next day. I immediately started photographing and documenting. The following morning my contact was there at 10, he had a field day. He informed Derek's wife of the calamity that was to come. They would be forced to tear down all the building additions, remove all the uncertified plumbing and wiring installations, have the plans reapproved, and start from scratch, which is an estimated loss of approximately $950,000. Derek was there in minutes. He was livid. He quickly threatened legal action, but Donovan simply told him that he had more than enough photograph evidence to have the property declared invalid within a week if Derek did not comply in writing. Donovan reminded Derek that he does this for a living and that the city has more legal resources to waste money on. I left Derek an invoice for my time just to smear salt in the wood and took my leave. Later he called me every name under the sun. I remained silent and he hung up. He went on a Facebook rant about me, which was a bad idea. All of the community stood up for me and it started storytelling competition where all kinds of people revealed stories of the unsavory things Derek did to them in the past. Apparently Derek has always been an asshole, he never changed. One day he called me and asked to meet. He sounded defeated and depressed, so I decided to meet and see what's up. I met him at a local busy convenience store. I know better than to take Derek the Weasel at face value, so noticed quickly when he laid his phone screen down on the table. I knew he may be recording the conversation. He apologized for his behavior, which surprised me, and told me that this whole dilemma has all but bankrupted him. He told me he took out a loan for the building additions and cut corners to save money, that everyone does it. He showed me the water bill, which was nearly $80,000, a problem easily erased with a qualified plumber's signature and endorsement. I refused. He got irate again. Then he asked me, "Why did you do this to me? I know I was a dick to you when we were kids, but I don't deserve to have my and my wife's live ruined because of mistakes I made when I was a kid. What kind of person are you? You told me I was in good hands, I trusted you, you assured me you would help me, then you stabbed me in the back. You quoted me only a few hundred and told me not to worry." I replied, "I said no such thing. Derek, stop lying, you told me that it would cost a few hundred, maybe less. I heard you say it, you promised to help me, gave me recommendations. Why are you doing this to me? Seneca, Derek, you must have imagined it." I looked him in the eye. He knew exactly why I said that, the same thing he told me almost 20 years ago. I repeated just to drive it home. "Seneca, you're being a baby, I never quoted you for anything, you imagined it." He knew I was destroying him financially because of a Batman action figure he stole from me 20 years ago. I could see it in his eyes, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. His expression was a mixture of astonishment and disgust. I looked him dead in the eyes for a few seconds for effect, then got up and left. I slept like a baby that night, and had a goofy smile all week after. He tried calling a few times but sent him a text stating that further harassment will be met with legal action. Derek, you know what your real name is, and what mine is. If in future you read this and realize how I screwed you over, remember how costly that little Batman action figure was to you after years of accumulated interest in karma. The look of despair on your face when you realize why you are ruined was delicious. I cackled maniacally on the drive home from that convenience store. It was time for you to pay the piper. And if you think this will help you legally, go ahead and try, it won't, so don't waste your time. Or rather do, waste as much time and money. I welcome being even more of a financial inconvenience to your life. Fuck you, Derek.